Yes, Dr. Tennant, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for the invitation.
So tell us a little bit about your work. You do some things with voltage in the body. Explain what that means.
Perhaps it would be good for me to explain how I started doing this. I'm trained as an ophthalmologist.
Oh.
So as I treated people who had viral infections of their eyes, I inhaled those viruses and got encephalitis. I slept about 16 hours a day. I'd have 2 or 3 hours a day in which I could understand a newspaper, and then like a light switch, it'd go off and I couldn't understand it anymore. So the best doctors I could find said I had 3 viruses in my brain and they didn't know what to do about it, so good luck. So I began the process of trying to figure out how to get myself well. So I started with the idea that if I could figure out how to make one cell work, I could make them all work. So I started reading cellular biology books, and they would mention that cells have to run at a pH of 7.35 to 7.45. Well, I didn't really know exactly what that meant, except something about acid-base balance. And when I began to read about it, I discovered that pH is the measurement of voltage in a solution. And so the next issue then was to figure out how to measure the voltage in my brain. And I found that a Japanese doctor named Nakatani had developed that technology in 1951. So I got his rudimentary technology, realizing that my brain should be running at 25 millivolts. When I measured it, it was running between 2 and 4 millivolts.
Wow.
So now I knew why it didn't work. And as time went on, I began to realize that the acupuncture meridians are what carried the voltage from place to place. It's basically our wiring system. And I also found that each acupuncture wire goes through specific teeth, and that I had a root canal in this upper molar, which is in what the Chinese call the spleen stomach circuit. Well, it turns out that that circuit provides voltage not only for the stomach and the spleen, which explained that why my stomach hurt all the time and why my spleen was large and killing my platelets and making me bleed, but it also provided voltage for the thinking part of the brain.
Wow.
So when I had that root canal pulled, within 48 hours, my bleeding disorder was cured and my brain started working again. And so that led me down the path of trying to understand the role of voltage in health and disease.
Can you talk a little bit about how the role of voltage plays out in a disorder like autism?
Well, most people think about autism as primarily a brain syndrome, and it certainly it has those features.
Sure.
But also everybody who's involved with autism knows that generally they have stomach problems, small intestine problems, digestion problems, etc. So if you measure autistic kids, what you will see is that in those that are up to about 3 or 4 years old, all of the organs are running at about 50 millivolts, which is high voltage. After about 3 or 4 years old, they seem to burn out, and almost all of their circuits are running between 5 and 15 millivolts. And so if you take the time to look, you'll find that most of those older kids have become hypothyroid, because thyroid hormone controls the voltage at the cell membrane and the mitochondrial level. So correcting their thyroid is a first step in
Is that done
beginning
through traditional means, through the
Yeah, you
T3,
use
T4?
traditional labs.
Sure.
T4 is not really very important, unfortunately. What you really need to know is how much T3 do they have, because it controls the cell membrane. And then T2 controls the mitochondria.
Oh, interesting.
The brain itself has 4 different circuits. Let me explain that in a better way. The human body is a portable electronic device, and all electronic devices have to have a battery system, don't they?
Absolutely.
Well, it turns out that our muscles are piezoelectric. So what does that mean? So when I do my muscles like this, I'm generating electrons. But fortunately, my muscles are also rechargeable batteries. And then the fascia that's around a muscle is a semiconductor. So what's that? A semiconductor is a collection of molecules that move electrons from place to place at the speed of light and only in one direction. So the fascia around a muscle is its conductive wiring.
What have your results been with children of autism, and how many have you been working with? Is that new to you?
Well, I've only treated a few autistic kids. I tend to treat their parents more.
Good. They probably need it more
because they need it.
sometimes, yes.
But, you know, once you realize that the body is constantly replacing itself, so you get new cells in the macula of your eye every 48 hours. The lining of your intestines replaced every 3 days. The skin you're sitting in today is only 6 weeks old. Your liver's 8 weeks old. So we're constantly having to replace ourselves. And so chronic disease of any kind occurs when you lose the ability to make new cells at work. So what's it take to make new cells? Well, it takes 50 millivolts of energy. The inside of cells are made from amino acids. The body's source of amino acids is when you eat a protein, stomach acid breaks it into aminos. The outside of cells are made of fat. So you have to have bile to absorb fat, so you have to have a liver and gallbladder at work so that you have the fat for the cell membranes. You have to have vitamins and minerals. That's a control of a substance called fulvic, F-U-L-V-I-C. You have to have oxygen. That's under control of nitric oxide. You have to have water. The water inside of cells is not H2O, it's H3O2, which is an electron donor form of water. And then you have to deal with all of the toxins that are in the body that damage cells, like mercury and other heavy metals.
I've been hearing a lot about aluminum.
Aluminum, any of the heavy metals, pesticides, petroleum products, etc. So if you look at all of the things it takes to make a cell and you replace those, including the voltage, then the body just simply starts making new cells and heals itself. The body can heal almost anything if you give it the voltage and the raw materials to do so.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you
Pleasure.
for providing the book and the resources for parents to learn more.
You're welcome.
Well, the term energy medicine has been around for at least 5,000 years that we know about. The oldest known medical books is the Yellow Emperor's Book of Acupuncture from 5,000 years ago. So the concept of energy in medicine is actually perhaps one of the original ones and not a new one. However, the idea of energy in the United States disappeared in the early 1900s because under the urging of the primary investors in the pharmaceutical companies, the Congress passed a bill that made it illegal for federal funds to go to anyone who said there was energy in the body, and that really shut down the idea of energy in the body in this country as compared to the rest of the world until Nixon came back from China and instructed the NIH to make acupuncture part of traditional medicine. So it's an old concept, but just beginning to be reintroduced into the United States. Every cell in the body has to have voltage to work, and it runs at this approximately minus 25 millivolts. But our cells in our body are constantly wearing out. So you get new cells in the macula of your eye every 2 to 3 days. The lining of your intestine is replaced every 3 days. Your skin is replaced every 6 weeks. Your liver is replaced every 8 weeks. Your nervous system every 8 months, and so forth. So we're constantly wearing ourselves out and have to make new cells to replace those. Now, to make a new cell requires minus 50 millivolts of energy plus all of the materials it takes to make a cell. And so once you understand what I just said, that we constantly have to do maintenance on ourselves, then you come to realize that chronic disease occurs when you lose the ability to make new cells at work. Now, the brain itself, which, of course, this particular conversation is focused on, is why is the brain malfunctioning? The brain itself has 3 different power supplies. The frontal lobes of the brain get their voltage from what in acupuncture is called the spleen-stomach circuit. The lateral portions, or each side of the brain, with its temporal lobe and part of the parietal lobe, gets its power supply from what's called the liver-gallbladder circuit. And then if you imagine in your mind what a bald-headed man looks like, the area that's bald and all the brain that's underneath it gets its power supply from what's called the kidney-bladder circuit. And so in each of those situations, you can look at the power supply for those parts of the brain and begin to figure out which ones are malfunctioning. So in the situation of autism, oftentimes what you'll see is the following. Now, in these younger kids, what you see is that they have an excess of the brain, of the neurochemical glutamate. So let's talk about that for just a minute. The couple of the neurochemicals in the brain are glutamate and GABA. Glutamate is necessary for learning and memory, but it stimulates the brain, whereas GABA is necessary for speech and it calms the brain. And normally glutamate is converted into GABA using vitamin B6. But this process of conversion from glutamate to GABA is often blocked by things like heavy metals and viruses. So when you recognize what I just said, you begin to see why you see the things that are characteristic of this spectrum. Because kids that have an excess glutamate are hyper, but they also are very smart and they remember almost everything. So that you have this incredible intelligence because their brain is basically in overdrive because of the excess glutamate, but they have trouble talking because they don't have enough GABA to do it. Now, when you have too much glutamate, what happens is that increases the insulin and lowers glucose in the brain. And when you have that process, it continues in a cycle to increase more glutamate and finally causes you to lose what's called glutathione. And once you lose glutathione, you have calcium flowing inside the cells, which causes death of the neurons. And one of the things that helps protect that is adequate levels of magnesium. And of course, when we go back to our old friend glutathione, which is the agent that controls whether or not you have the calcium influx, to make glutathione requires 3 amino acids. Well, we've already discussed your body's source for amino acids, haven't we? Stomach acid. So you have to have adequate levels of vitamin B1, iodine, zinc, salt, and the voltage to make stomach acid so that you have an ongoing source of amino acids to make the glutathione you need to protect the neurons. Now, if you look at this pattern that we're just discussing, one of the things that's interesting is that as you raise the voltage, it removes glutamate from the receptor sites. And of course, one of the ways we raise the voltage, other than correcting thyroid levels, is to use a device like the device I developed called the biomodulator. The biomodulator has the ability to measure the voltage in every organ and then to put it in treatment mode and insert electrons in a pattern that they'll be absorbed by the cell membranes and raise the voltage of the cell, and that causes the glutamate to be removed from the receptor sites, and thus you see the calming effect in autistic kids as you correct the voltage. Of course, there are other things one can do. For example, in the ability to convert glutamate to GABA, you have to have methyl form of B6. And this process is blocked by viruses and heavy metals, but that can be overcome with this stuff called fulvic acid. Normally it exists as a combination of humic and fulvic in about an 80-20 ratio, but you can get 100% fulvic, which will help remove and inactivate heavy metals. And of course, we've already discussed why you have to fix stomach acid in order to make the amino acids, and also realize that 80% of the GABA in your body is made in your pancreas rather than in your brain. And of course, one of the signals that tells the pancreas to make GABA is, our old friend stomach acid. So correcting stomach acid is very helpful in solving much of this complex stuff of glutamate versus GABA in the spectrum kids. So you have to have all of the things that it takes to make a new cell and to get rid of all of the things that damage cells as fast as you make them. And then you'll be successful, because the body knows how to repair itself. That is, it knows how to make new cells at work if you just give it the tools. And the tools are voltage, all the stuff you need to make the inside of a cell, to make the outside of a cell, to put the vitamins, the minerals, the oxygen, the water, and get rid of the toxins that have accumulated. Then the body makes a new cell that works, and guess what? People get well. And so this is what I do. This is what I see every day in my clinic. And it's a matter of, if I can get people to fix everything all at once, then most of the time they get well.